In the heart of South Carolina's Low Country lies a family name that once stood for power and prestige and untouchable influence. But behind this southern charm and wealth of the Murdoch dynasty, a chilling series of events began to unravel, ending in bloodshed, betrayal, and questions that remain unanswered to this day. From the mysterious death of a teenage boy on a rural road to the fatal boating accident involving the Murdoch's son, to the shocking double homicide that would shake the nation. The deeper you dig into the Murdoch murders, the more you realize not everything has been brought to light. Not every death has even been solved, and some secrets are still buried. This is more than a story of it's a story of a family empire collapsing under the weight of its own darkness. And today we're going to go a little bit deeper. The Murdoch case involves multiple victims related to homicides, financial fraud, and other crimes committed or connected to Alex Murdaugh. The most prominent murders were of his wife and son, for which Alex Murdaugh was convicted. But the saga includes so many other deaths and numerous financial victims. And the homicide victims in this case are Maggie Murdaugh, which is Alex Murdaugh's 52-year-old wife, and she was found fatally shot with a rifle at the family's hunting estate on June 7th of 2021. There's Paul Murdaugh. He's Alex and Maggie's 22-year-old son, who was also found fatally shot with a on the same property and date as his mother. There's Stephen Smith, a 19-year-old man, a high school classmate of Alex's older son, Buster, who was found dead in the middle of the road in 2015. His death was initially ruled a hit and run, but was later reclassified as a homicide and is under investigation to this day. Gloria Satterfield, the Murdaugh family's longtime housekeeper, who died in 2018 after a trip and fall at the Murdaugh home. Her death was classified as natural, but this was deemed inconsistent with her injuries, and the case was reopened as a criminal investigation. Mallory Beach was a 19-year-old woman who died in 2019 in a boating accident after Alex Murdaugh's son Paul allegedly crashed the boat while intoxicated. Beach's family later settled a wrongful death lawsuit for $15 million. Then there's dozens of financial fraud victims. Over more than a decade, Alex Murdaugh stole millions of dollars from vulnerable legal clients, his law firm, and insurance companies. Many of these individuals actually had suffered life-changing injuries and depended on the settlement money that Murdaugh pocketed. Specific financial victims were the Satterfield estate. After Gloria Satterfield's death, Murdaugh orchestrated a scheme to steal $4.3 million in insurance settlements that were meant for her sons. Hakeem Pickney, Murdaugh stole settlement money from the estate of this deaf quadriplegic man who died after a car crash. Then there's Jordan Jinks, a former friend that Murdaugh stole settlement money from that was intended to cover his medical bills. Curtis, cousin Eddie Smith, an alleged accomplice who Murdaugh hired in 2021 to stage his own for an insurance payout. Smith was later arrested on charges relating to assisted suicide, insurance fraud, and drugs. Now, there's tons of inconsistencies in this Murdaugh case. Tons, and I mean tons. And I actually found an article, Bizarre Things That Never Made Sense About the Alex Murdaugh Case. And I want to share it with you guys because there's so much about this case that never made sense. And this guy was so just entitled. Wait till you hear some of the shit he did. Even during his trial, his evil spread. We're going to get into that. But let's have a look at this article and we're going to see how the evil just continues to spread with this man. Bizarre things that never make sense about the Murdaugh case. All right. And here he is right here. He even looks evil. He's like that ginger. He's like that evil ginger, isn't he? So, the Murdaugh murders shocked the nation in 2021 when the wife and son of prominent South Carolina attorney were found slain. Maggie and Paul Murdaugh's murders appeared to languish unsolved for over a year until the arrest and indictment of Alex Murdaugh, Maggie's estranged husband, Paul's father, and the head of the family that had held a commanding role in South Carolina legal establishment for generations. Generations. Alex Murdaugh was convicted of the murders in a 2023 trial, but that verdict was not the end of the story, nor did it answer all the questions the public had about the attorney and his crime. Not only had he been siphoning impressive sums of money from his clients, but the family also had ties to a handful of suspicious deaths: a boat crash, a fatal fall, a hit and run. Bad luck or worse seemed to stalk those connected to the Murdochs. And that's what I'm talking about when I say the devil. The devil was in this guy. Just look at him. Few people doubt that there's blood on Alex Murdaugh's hands, but we may not yet know how much. I seriously would not put it past this guy to have just did way worse than what we even know about. What was the story with the boat crash? And here's some pictures from that day. In 2019, 2 years before he was murdered by his father, Paul Murdaugh was involved in a deadly boating accident. The crenulated coast of South Carolina is popular with boaters, especially for people lucky enough to have a family island, as the Murdaughs did. Okay, so that's what I mean. Like, this is what I mean. You're this rich that you have a family island, okay? And instead of just selling some of your to pay your bills, you just steal it off everybody. You just steal it off everyone because you think you're entitled to everyone else's because your money ran out. Crazy. In February 2019, Paul and a cohort of similarly underage friends decided to meet at the Murdaugh Island and pregame before heading to a party on another nearby island via the Murdaugh family boat. Crime scene photos show a depressing amount of Michelob Ultra in the cooler taken from the boat. After spending a few hours at the party, the group headed to the city of Beaufort to continue drinking on land, successfully being served at a bar. According to the other passengers, Paul was acting drunk and erratic, but as it was his family's boat, he still drove. He alternated between driving in circles and fighting with his girlfriend until 2:20 a.m. The boat struck a bridge and passenger Mallory Beach was thrown from the craft. Beach's body was recovered from the water several days later, about 5 miles downstream of the crash site. Meanwhile, images of the boat show serious structural damage and a significant amount of blood on the floor. And Murdaugh's blood showed a high 0.24 blood alcohol level several hours after the incident, which is triple the legal limit. Paul Murdaugh was indicted for felony charges in Beach's death and injuries to other passengers, but died before facing trial. Did Alex Murdaugh try to shift the blame in the boat crash? The story of the boat crash, as it can be pieced together from the accounts of surviving passengers, is fairly damning of Paul Murdaugh, but a lawsuit filed by survivor Connor Cook makes the rest of the family out to be complicit in Paul's wrongdoing. Per the court documents, Paul bought alcohol using his older brother Buster's ID and his mother's credit card, even though both knew he tended to drink to excess. And after the boat crash, Alex may have tried to shift blame from his son onto another passenger. Big surprise. At the hospital, Alex allegedly approached each survivor, some of whom, like Cook, were injured, and told them to say they didn't know who'd been driving the boat. Not perhaps the most credible lie given the size of the boat, but these were his instructions. Alex Murdaugh hired an attorney for Cook, though that attorney turned out to be his old college buddy and Paul's godfather. The documents go on to allege that the Murdaughs tried to blame Cook himself for the crash, using their influence in a targeted rumor campaign to turn the community's focus on Cook, not on Paul Murdaugh. Cook had been told to be silent per this theory to avoid too many people hearing right away that Paul had been at the tiller. Cook withdrew the suits in 24, leaving questions about the parties' relative culpability formerly unanswered. Why was Maggie Murdaugh suspicious? Alex Murdaugh and his wife Maggie had not been getting along at the time of the murders and were living apart, with Maggie holding up at the family's beach house. So when her husband texted her to meet him at the family home in Islandton, about an hour from the beach house, Maggie didn't feel like going, only agreeing when Alex told her his father was dying and that this was her chance to say goodbye. Maggie countered with an offer to meet at the hospital, but no, Alex insisted that she meet him at the Murdaugh home in Islandton, sometimes called the Mazzell property from its street address, so they could drive to the hospital together. Maggie vented in a text to a friend calling Alex's behavior fishy. And granted, anyone who reads about the case quickly comes to feel that everything Alex does is fishy. But why was Maggie suspicious of him? And why did she go to the house after, against her better judgment? When she arrived, she left the car running, presumably expecting to leave again right away, but she never made it back to the car. Alex's machinations were even more sinister than she realized. Why did an experienced prosecuting attorney do such a bad job covering his tracks? Alex was an experienced prosecuting attorney who ostensibly knew the South Carolina legal system inside and out. He knew, or should have known, what investigators would look for and at least some of the tools they could use to probe the and his involvement. And yet, even with his connections and experience, he was caught and convicted. And while that's good for the interest of justice and the safety of the people who might pass into this guy's orbit, it does raise the question of why the murders were so sloppy and Murdoch's defense so weak that the presiding judge at his trial went on record to comment that the evidence of guilt is overwhelming. Casings from the matched others found at the property, indicating that the weapon had been fired there before and was therefore likely a family. Murdaugh's voice appearing on a Snapchat video Paul took shortly before his death. Cell phone location data undercut his account of his movements. We can speculate that perhaps Alex Murdaugh wasn't thinking clearly due to his acknowledged opioid addiction and perhaps the enormity of the crimes he had planned. But until he sits for a tell all interview, we won't know why an allegedly brilliant legal mind so badly bungled the highest stakes situation of his life. And why was he such a bad witness? You don't have to take the stand in your own defense. And Alex Murdaugh knows this. The Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution means that, among other provisions, prosecutors cannot call defendants as witnesses. Only the defense can choose for the defendant to take the stand. But if they do so, the defendant is subject to a cross examination by the prosecution. Murdaugh was a tarnished defendant. Evidence of his financial crimes and opioid addiction were present at his trial, answering for the murder of his own family. So, why did he go on the stand and why did his attorneys let him? Jurors who spoke to the media after the trial confirmed that Murdaugh's testimony had hurt him. He acknowledged lying about his whereabouts, claiming not to have gone down to the kennels near which he'd found the bodies earlier in the evening. Cell phone data disproved this story, and Murdaugh's initial attempt at deceit seems to have made him generally hard to believe. His former prominence also hurt him, with one juror commenting that she saw his testimony as just another iteration of the courtroom performances he'd given throughout his career. Why did Alex have his cousin shoot him in the head? There's the cousin. Whole families are different. But even with this caveat in place, it seems Alex Murdaugh came at his cousin with a big ass. Curtis Edward Smith was admittedly not just a distant cousin, but also a friend and a former client. So Murdaugh figured Smith was someone he could ask to please shoot him in the head by the side of the rural road in order to stage his death in a botched carjacking. Roughly 3 months after Paul and Maggie's death, Murdaugh's law firm had formally accused him of financial wrongdoing. Given that the jig seemed to be up, he wanted to die in a way that would allow his surviving son Buster to collect on a $10 million insurance policy. As suicide often voids insurance policies, Murdaugh needed his death to be by someone else's hand, or at least appear to be. Smith was game, but the men whiffed the stunt, leaving Murdaugh shot in the head but still alive. Good Lord. Murdaugh's take of the carjacking fell apart under questioning. Smith maintained that while he had disposed of the gun, he had not shot Murdaugh intentionally. The gun went off as he tried to wrest the weapon from Murdaugh to prevent him from shooting himself. Both men would face charges in the incident, with Murdaugh's insurance fraud count going in the big pile and Smith's charges for, among other crimes, assisted still pending as of the most recent news reports in early 2024. Was Gloria Satterfield? Now, this is the one I think, yes, she was. I think she was. One of the suspicious other deaths associated with the Murdaugh family was the demise of Gloria Satterfield, the family's long-term housekeeper. Satterfield fell and was injured at the Murdaugh family home, the same at which Paul and Maggie were early February 2018, lingering a few weeks before dying on February 26th. Details of Satterfield's injuries are not publicly available, but the initial story, according to Alex Murdaugh, was that she had tripped over the family's dogs and had fallen down the house's front stairs. This later proved to be a lie, with the story concocted to get a bigger payout from the Murdaugh's insurance company. No autopsy was performed, and the coroner was apparently not notified of her allegedly accidental death on private property, and yet her death certificate attributes her death to natural causes, not the accidental death Murdaugh described. This is terrible. This part's terrible. After Alex also attempted to swindle Satterfield's next of kin out of the settlement resulting from her death. He offered to look after her adult son's interests in the discussions with the insurance company, but then never gave them any money that he received. The Satterfield sons eventually reached a settlement with Corey Fleming, Murdoch's friend and associate who had involved himself in the case, and eventually received both the original payout and one from Fleming's firm, Malpractice Insurer. That's ridiculous. The woman dies on your property, and then you try to steal the son's insurance settlement? Are you kidding? Like, this guy's literally the devil himself. Is Stephen Smith's death related? Stephen Smith was a 19-year-old nursing student when he was found dead in the middle of a road in rural South Carolina in July 2015. Smith's death was initially ruled a hit and run, but in the summer of 21, South Carolina police announced that they would be reopening the case as a explicitly citing information that they uncovered in the investigation of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh's. Now, what was that? What was that information? What have they found out since then? It's now 25. What about this young man? Smith was openly gay, and both his mother and the Smith family's attorney suspect that its sexuality may have made Smith a target. News reports indicate that Buster Murdaugh, who had been a classmate of Smith's, was mentioned in witness interviews in the initial investigation. Though he had not been charged as of mid 2025, Buster wasn't the only Murdaugh with a rumored connection to Smith's death. Alex's brother Randy, also an attorney, called the family and offered to help in the aftermath. And when Smith's mother drove by the area where his body was found, she saw Alex and Randy standing by the side of the road. There was no apparent debris from car impact near or on Smith's body, and the sheriff reporting his death to his parents initially said he'd been shot. A policeman on the scene has claimed that the corpse appeared staged, and unlike in most car impact deaths, Smith's clothing was undamaged and his shoes remained on his feet. The investigation continues. So, what was the motive? What was the motive? The prosecution in any case is not technically obligated to prove a motive, but realistically, their job is made much easier if they can point to a clear reason for a killing. Though the prosecutors were ultimately successful in the Murdaugh case, Alex Murdaugh's reasons for killing his wife and son remain open to speculation. During the trial, the prosecution argued that Murdaugh's house of cards was on the verge of collapse. His law partner had confronted him about his financial misdeeds, and the walls were closing in. Murdaugh could distract from his impending troubles by becoming the bereaved survivor of a decimated family. Maybe the other problems would simply go away. If nothing else, he might buy himself some time. It's not a great plan. Fraud law generally doesn't have a bad things happened to me later cause, but Alex Murdaugh was decidedly not a clever strategist at this point. The official version remains unsatisfying, but it's what watchers of this bizarre labyrinth case have to go on. How did Alex think he would get away with all that theft? The financial stresses that allegedly provided the motive for Alex's of his wife and son were colossal by most people's standards. If he and his family had been found liable in the boat crash lawsuits, he might have been on the hook for $10 million. Additionally, Murdaugh had wrapped himself in a complex web of fraud schemes, bilking his employer and his clients alike. Gloria Satterfield's death wasn't the only case in which Murdaugh had lifted money. It turned out he had set up a dummy bank account, made it look like it belonged to a structured settlement administrator, into which he had siphoned funds that belonged to his personal injury clients. This private account was also set up to receive litigation fees payable to Murdaugh's firm, not to Murdaugh himself, cutting the firm completely out of the financial loop. Murdaugh had even pulled local banks into his schemes, with one bank executive and childhood associate of Alex's, Russell Lafitte, found guilty of helping Murdaugh conceal his financial misdeeds and allowing him to take out loans against accounts in his clients' names. It's a complex web of crime to keep afloat, but it seems Murdaugh needed the cash. According to The Independent, his drug addiction had gotten so bad and his ability to bargain hunt was so poor that he was spending over $50,000 on opiates a week. That's insane. Why did Becky Hill meddle with a jury? Now, this is the one I was talking about. This is like just a random person She was the court clerk for the trial. She even started going evil, right? So in May 2025, a strange coda to the sensational Murdaugh trial emerged. Becky Hill, the court clerk for the trial, was charged with a raft of crimes, including perjury, misconduct in office, and using her position for personal gain. Hill allegedly had inappropriate contact with multiple jurors, advising them not to be deceived by Murdaugh's defense and commenting that the trial shouldn't take long. Only a few months after the trial, Hill published a firsthand account of her role in the trial and observations behind the doors of justice. That Murdaugh. Hill then admitted to having partly plagiarized the book, which was pulled from publication, as well as simply fabricating a number of incidents. Hill is additionally accused of having used her office to promote the book, though perhaps her time would have been better spent actually writing it. With the allegations of jury tampering by Hill now attached to the case, Murdaugh's lawyers petitioned the court for a retrial, arguing in part that Hill wanted Murdaugh to be convicted because that would help sell her book. This motion was denied, with the judge acknowledging that Hill probably behaved foolishly and unethically, but rejecting the argument that Hill's behavior had seriously affected the verdict. So, yeah, a lot of unanswered questions. There's actually a documentary on Netflix about this entire case, which you should probably go check out. It's actually really, really good, but it leaves a lot of questions unanswered. The thing about it is this evil just seemed to just seep out and just spread from person to person to person. Years later at the court hearing, couldn't help but spread to the court clerk. All we can do is speculate at this point because it doesn't seem like anything's being solved. There's still parts of this case that are, being investigated. Check out the documentary on Netflix and let me know what you think about this whole thing down in the comment section. And I will see you on the next one.